Teaching Out of Bounds, Parallel Teacher Training and Experiences from 1940 to 1969. And good evening, members and guests of the Newfoundland and Labrador Historical Society, here and online. And by means of definition, the title, in the context of this lecture, teaching out of bounds meant to accept employment beyond the familiar and known. Boundaries indicate where we are allowed or expected to be. After 6 weeks summer training in St. John's, most teenage teachers were then sent to islands and coves outside their comfort zone, out of bounds, leaving family, friends, and the familiar far behind. When I went teaching with a grade 3 certificate in 1965-66, I met several who had been trained for 6 weeks teaching in nearby communities. Some of my colleagues at the high school had started that way, but had gone on to full-year study at university afterwards. Meeting these teachers, along with my interest in history and love of research in general, led me to explore the lives of these courageous teenage probationers who nurtured students and upgraded general literacy throughout rural Newfoundland and Labrador. They toiled with minimal teaching aids, teaching in rudimentary structures, lacking in most creature comforts. The course of their lives were changed forever by their initial willingness to go out of bounds. So slide 2, when we get to it or whatever, shows it's from the days of cocoa malt. And I'm sure a lot of you would remember that. The chocolate powder mixed with boiled water at school, which was an attempt for nutritional improvement for Newfoundland students. And in some kind of a strange way, you could think of it as the forerunner, I guess, of school lunch programs. So who here would have had experiences or heard of family members who used or drank cocoa malt? Yes, yes, I know my brother used to talk about it. It came pretty much, it was a byproduct of the commission years. Both it and the probationers' summer school arrived pretty much the same time. Before we move into the philosophy and history linked to teacher formation, let's check in with Randy Peary's story. Randy from Bonavista Bay found himself on the west coast of the island in 1960, but first there were experiences outside his comfort zone just by spending 6 weeks in St. John's, he recalls. There were a lot of firsts that summer. First trip on a taxi, on a train, first trip to a park, first time seeing a TV through the window of a store on Water Street. We'll return to his story in a few minutes. I'll just digress a little here. The social enrichment brought by these teaching adventurers could prove comic, for young female teachers routinely attracted the attention and hot pursuit of local Romeos. In the late 50s, my brother Bob and his friends were just out of high school themselves and excited to see 2 very attractive young ladies show up as teachers in the Valleyfield United Church School. They socialized with these teachers during their tenure, but in June, the young women returned to their home communities. I think it was Bonavista and Dunville. With replacements arriving in late August, the expectations of the local blades had been raised from the previous year, so they were keen to check out the new arrivals. When a car stopped in front of the teacher's boarding house, my brother and his friends, covertly parked nearby, flashed on their headlights as a new teacher emerged from her taxi. To their dismay, they soon realized that the 40-ish matronly-looking figure getting out would not be a new girlfriend for either one of them. So this was the kind of off-record history that went on with probationer teaching, no doubt, in that time period. In 1936, in the middle of the Depression, only 7% of teachers had some post-secondary training, while an astonishing 44% themselves had not graduated from grade 11, but there they were in the classroom. While the government had managed to reopen teacher training in 1935, the one-year program could graduate only 100 students annually, not enough to replace those leaving. So staffing classrooms was akin to filling a paper bag with a hole in the bottom. Hence came the parallel solution, the probationer's summer school. Most summers, the instruction was offered at Prince of Wales College on the Merchant Road, other years from Memorial College on Parade Street. Attending gave you a P license, while a second summer of training upgraded you to B status. So looking at the graph here on the slide, we can see in 1951, with that red line, degreed teachers barely registered, while approximately 18% were uncertified, that is the green line. However, by 1958, the lines had intersected around 15%, and by 1985, uncertified teachers were no more. Smallwood's enlargement of the Faculty of Education meant less work for probationer teachers. The second illustration here is a class of probationers in training in 1952 at Prince of Wales College, among them Elsie Melindy of Lumsden, to whom I will return a little later. The subjects taught were classroom management for sure, some physical education and social studies. Key was showing the young novices how to mark the register, to keep attendance morning and afternoon. Attendance decided the number of teachers allocated to a school, so it was treated quite seriously. In a two-room school or larger, the principal or the itinerant visiting school inspector provided some oversight over novice teachers, but these sent away in one-room schools were really supervising themselves. So moving on to slide 4, my survey. Since 2020, I have talked with over 50 teachers or their family members. I selected teacher movement from Bonavista and Trinity Bays, those who had hailed from these areas or who had taught there. Most mainstream denominations were represented. Home community and first posting were noted, and subsequent career development. In my survey, questions zeroed in on work conditions, travel to assigned communities, degree of isolation, and impact on the person's life journey. Here is the Newfie bullet, which carried most teachers to their destinations, and a picture from concurrent workshops of last year's Faculty of Education Conference on 100 years of teacher preparation. Those surveyed were appreciative. I also found probationer teachers in surprising places. Last summer, while on holiday, I met an elderly couple, Jean and Reg Tulk. By happenstance, I learned that Jean had attended summer school at 17 and become the last teacher on Pinchard's Island due to resettlement. Later, she became Newtown's postmistress for 40 years, showing how female teachers soon married or found alternative careers. Conversely, others upgraded and returned to the classroom. Two of my former elementary teachers, now in their 90s, did just that. So we will have a sample of some of these movements of teachers. Charles Beckett from Old Pearlycan went to Southbrook, almost over towards Deer Lake. Benjamin Brushett from Burin Peninsula was lucky. He only went to Winterton in his first posting. Donald Case, however, of Salmon Cove in Conception Bay, went to Black Island, which I believe I remember is down somewhere in Notre Dame Bay. And George Cross of Badger's Key went to Leading Tickles. Again, there seemed to be a movement from east down to west and north. Gordon Dalton of Conception Harbour went to St. Brendan's Island. Agnes Hopkins of Greens Harbour, Trinity Bay, went to Little Bay, a small mining community out from Springdale. Phyllis Humphreys from Cape Friels went to Port aux Basques. Mabel Ivany from Ivanhoe in Trinity Bay went to a small resettled community in Bonavista Bay called St. Paul's Island. And Olive Keeping of Point Rosie in Placentia Bay went on to Cape Ray, right over on the other end of the province. Loretta Shepherd of Lark Harbour, Bay of Islands, went to the south coast in Arbor Lacou. And Chesley Stone of Monroe in Trinity Bay went to Harbour Grace. So a word on the depth and the breadth of these surveyed. As the Minister of Education told Olive Keeping of Port Rosie, a resettled community near Galtus, Olive recalls, his words to me were, "I'm not sending you so far away that you won't get home for Christmas, but far enough that you won't get home every weekend." And there seemed to be a subtle strategy on how to prevent these young novices from throwing in the towel and returning to their home community. As we saw there, the geographical challenges between schools offered and the teacher's home community. Mabel Ivany of Ivanhoe found herself in Badger's Key with the Anglican School Board a few years later, and she told me how my father, the school board secretary-treasurer and a local shop owner, would inform the young teachers when he had new dresses arrive at his store so that they could come up and have a preview of the new stock. So again, this would be sort of off the record kind of interactions for outport teaching. From the interviewed, findings from the interviews, in the top photo there, receiving flowers from two former students, is Miss Alice Lacey of Wesleyville, a true teaching icon. Starting out, she taught my mother in 1925. When I attended grade 11 in Wesleyville in 1962, Miss Lacey was still chugging along and had made her way to the new Central High School, where she taught grade 7 for 10 years. When I joined that same high school staff in 1969, the indomitable Miss Lacey had just retired that June. Lifelong teachers who settled in for the long haul became community leaders and were expected to perform tasks outside their professions. Peter Hall of Newtown, seen here as vice principal of Wesleyville Central High, he was considered a dean of education in Bonavista North, finishing high school in 1947, then completed a year at Memorial. Afterwards, he taught and influenced many more who set out to teach across the province. Among his community roles of church warden, town councillor, local historian, mayor, and many others, one is predominant: lay minister for 63 years. Peter concluded, "One lesson that I've learned throughout my career, the greatest teacher on earth is experience." Peter passed away at the age of 93 in April of 2022. So tremendous life experiences. In the Retired Teachers Association newsletters of 2020 and 2021, I contributed selected excerpts showing the tremendous impact that such teachers and their families made to communities as life went on. Howard Rowbottom was a young man from Jobet's Arm, Fogo, when he came through Valleyfield at the end of summer school. My father, still a member of the school board, noted his credentials and offered him a position in the nearby community of Northwest Arm. Howard changed the gene pool of Bonavista North by marrying Leah Winter of Northwest Arm. Their grandson is now mayor of New West Valley. And Sophie Blackmore, pictured below, from Newtown, relates, in 1956, I passed grade 11 with honors and attended the 6-week training. Sophie first taught in Badger's Key, pictured here with 2 teaching colleagues, but later, once married with 5 children, she upgraded considerably. She relates, in 1994, when I was 55, our son Clyde was teaching in Coral Harbor, Northwest Territories. He asked would I like to do a maternity replacement. I was overjoyed to think that I was still worthy of that career. So off she went, out of bounds. Incidentally, Sophie's uncle, twin sister, husband, 3 of her sons, and a daughter-in-law have all been active in the teaching profession. Reverend Charles Green, Anglican board chair on the Bonavista Peninsula in the 60s and 70s, observed, since 80% of those sent to staff small schools were native Newfoundlanders, the culture shock was not so severe. Many had just graduated from similar drafty schools, devoid of indoor plumbing and central heating, with non-existent teaching aids. Of course, Labrador schools enjoyed instructions from Moravian missionaries. St. Anthony area schools had recruits from the Grenville Association. And some Mennonite ministers or missionaries, came to that area. So while familiar and home-like for these native Newfoundlanders, the assignment still required bravery and a sense of responsibility. Remember, many of these schools were sole charge or all grade. So in the top 2 pictures there, Reverend Green over to the left, he's seen there at the beginning of his career when he would have been board chair at his first parish of Burgeo Ramia. Eber Walters, a well-known name across the province of Puchco, is in the second picture or the first picture. He started teaching in Bombay in 1949 for the Anglican School Board, staying until 1952 as vice principal of a 6-room school, K to 11. His daughter, also a teacher, Lorna Waters, tells of the extreme isolation of her father's first year away from home, not receiving news of his mother's death until weeks after she had died. Thus began a lifetime of service to communities on the West Coast with a 3-year detour to Badger's Key, Bonavista Bay. The NLTA, sports, the Anglican Church, Army cadets, and later municipal government were all beneficiaries of Heber's sense of caring. Many here will remember him as the longtime mayor of Portugal Cove, St. Philip's. And the way that he connected with a lot of these young students was to coach them and get organized hockey for them. My brother remembers that when Heber Walters was in Badger's Key, his hockey team was the best one on the shore. And Carrie Starks, a young Pentecostal teacher from Valleyfield, finished school in 1954. After the summer training, was soon en route to Birchie Bay, which is the community shown here, by coastal boat, train, and lastly, in an open boat. Her volunteer position as church organist began immediately and continued for a lifetime, for she married and settled in the community. Her son, Alvin, was taught by his mother and inspired to become a full-time teacher himself over his lifetime. Like Peter Hall, we can place these 2 individuals in the category of community builders. And now let's return to Randy's story. 16-year-old Randy Perry in the upper picture. He recalls, around the 3rd week of August, a telegram arrived from Fred Kirby, Anglican superintendent. Proceed to St. Paul's Inlet, St. Barb, as principal. Of course I accepted, not knowing the location, the salary, or with whom I would be staying. At least it was a position, and hopefully pay to go along with it. Since you had to be 17 to receive a license, his did not arrive until Christmas. He continues, while I had to leave my family and my sweetheart behind until Christmas, the prospects of the new adventure were exciting. At Deer Lake, a small bus left for Trout River, and this young boy, who had never traveled alone, was aboard. So you can see how going out of bounds could feel almost like a Kipling kind of adventure. Randy found an outstanding boarding house. He says, I became a part of all they did. What more could a lonely 16-year-old boy need at that time? But Ralph Rogers of Fair Island met the unexpected with his first posting. He tells us, during the summer of 1958, I visited St. John's on the family schooner to seek a teaching position for the coming year. Not being satisfied with what was offered by the Anglican superintendent, I crossed the corridor and met with the superintendent for amalgamated schools. After a brief discussion, I accepted a position at their 4-room school in Howley. My salary with a P license was $106.67 per month. The total number of students in my classes, 4 to 6, were 50. To get to Howley, I had to travel by passenger boat to Gamble and from there by train. So we see there, of course, the water tower in Howley. I could write a book about my accommodations in Howley, but I'll try to be brief. I spent only 1 month at the first boarding house. Being charged $65 a month was one, but not the main reason I left. I was never given a key to the house, and often if I went out after supper, I would return to find a lady away and the door locked. I spent a few uncomfortable hours outside on cold, rainy nights. Never felt welcome there. In October, Ralph moved to boarding house number 2. But unfortunately, number 3 was to follow, but we'll just leave it there. And now to return to Elsie Melindy. In 1952, as we noted, she arrived in St. John's to take on her 6 weeks of training. Lines from a poem that she composed also show the upheaval and a new world feeling of going outside one's comfort zone. Now, how would I get to school tomorrow? I was so scared of what to do. But my friend at the boarding house said, I'll go along with you. He walked to Prince of Wales with me and showed me marks along the way so that I would be able to go on my own and find my way each day. And at the end of that training, at the Department of Education, I was given the map of Newfoundland. I picked the place I wanted to teach and was ready to make my plan. I chose to go to Cape Friels North, a place that was near my home, for I wanted to be back there and never more to roam. And we'll explain a little later the difference between the 50s and the 60s, because people going out in the 40s and 50s had much more autonomy and control over where they were teaching, where they were going to teach. So here's Elsie in 2019 with a former pupil at a Lumsden School reunion. Below is a picture of Heart's Desire, where Kathleen Fitzpatrick spent several years teaching with the Roman Catholic School Board. Initially, she had been thrust ungraded into a classroom in Jerseyside. But in 1961, armed with a grade 1 certificate, she was offered Heart's Desire, Trinity Bay. It was close to home, so she accepted gratefully and was sent to St. Joseph's School. There was no direction from the school board, but they did arrange accommodations. She recalls, my first response as I rode through Heart's Desire was dismay. Oh my God, this place is tiny. There's nothing here. and I'm stuck here for the next 10 months? A reaction typical of many teachers going out of bounds, settling throughout the province. But like Randy Perry, Katie was given a boarding house where she felt home immediately. Subsequently, she grew to love the people and her students and found her personal heart's desire in the community by marrying there. Kathleen explains, organizing the annual school concert and sports tournaments was expected, and any teacher involved in community events such as bingo, dances, fall sales was looked on with great appreciation. Helping people file their tax forms, apply for pensions, or be municipal councillors were other requests, for many residents did not have enough learning to take on such roles themselves. And on to slide 11, and the story of Verbena Newhope, who entered the teaching profession like Kathleen without any preparation after graduating from the Salvation Army School in Dildo in 1961. She relates, that summer, a school board member approached me saying a teacher was needed in Lethbridge, Bonavista Bay, and would I accept? I traveled from Whitburn to Clarenville by train and was picked up by someone from the community. The church, school, and boarding house were all in proximity. I stayed with the female Salvation Army officer in a small bungalow. Her pay as a non-graded teacher was $95 a month. In 1962, she attended the probationer summer school and was awarded a school in South Dildo. 4 years later, Verbena was married with 2 children, but there was a teacher shortage in Dildo, so she was offered a grade 5 position. Obviously, by the 60s, the ban on married teachers seemed to be lifting. This was a modernized classroom now with 30 students. Exams were handwritten on stencils with carbon paper in the middle. They were printed off on a hand-cranked machine called the ink duplicator. Rudimentary technology of a sort had arrived in the province's classrooms. And like Sophie Blackmore, Verbena never strayed from education and continued to substitute frequently in the 70s. Then came a second career as a teaching assistant at Woodland Elementary. She relates, after a first year, 1989, I went to trade school to obtain my student assistant certificate, then worked for another 25 years, only retiring at age 70. Oddly enough, in the mid to late 60s, there was less control over one's posting. In 1950, Nita Roberts of Brookfield had applied for a United Church position in Traytown and received it. But over the next 15 years, many reported having zero input into their selection. Here's Sybil Norris's experience after attending probationer summer school in 1968. It's last year operating. I'm not 100% sure if it was 68 or 69. She describes her situation vividly. At the end of the session, our names were posted on a bulletin board with the name of the community where you were being sent. You had no choice. The various school boards sent in a list stating where teachers were needed. I had never heard of River of Ponds until then. Lack of electricity and phones greeted her on the Northern Peninsula. The only communication home, just as it had been 25 years previously, by letter writing or telegraph. Like Katie Fitzpatrick, Sybil was asked to help residents file their income tax and other government forms. Starter salary, however, had more than doubled, a byproduct of Confederation. But to note the other side of the coin, the narrowed school selection for probationers was caused by hundreds of degreed teachers now graduating from Memorial, amplified by Smallwood's incentives for a time which even included a salary to those studying education. And I have to confess or be ashamed to say that I did receive that salary in my 5th year of education at Memorial. And Olive Keeping reported at the same time that with a couple of years teaching experience, a licensed teacher with the P, the B, and the C licenses were still given some autonomy in selecting a school. This led her to Trinity in Bonavista Bay. So to look at some sort of unique situations going all the way back to the 40s. Overall, the teaching situation in smaller isolated outports remained static throughout that 30-year period. And those from probationer summer school continued to supply teachers there. But a few unique twists to outport schooling in the early 40s. Frank Moores, not the premier, of Freshwater near Carbonear, lived and taught in the itinerant rail car school. From the book up there by Randy Noseworthy called The School Car. The Department of Education, Grand Falls Pulp and Paper Company, and the Reed Railway made it possible as a 3-way collaborative effort. The teacher's residence was the rail car. The classroom in one section of it, and students enjoyed electricity and furnace heat while attending school, much better than in most of the outport schools. Frank summed up his adventurous attitude like this: a young person is capable of going anywhere and doing anything. I said, sure, I'll take it. So it's much like the people that joined the army during the First World War. They were just so pumped up and going off on the sense of adventure. So below there we have Nita Vincent of Cape Island, Bonavista Bay, who attended the 6-week summer school at Memorial College in 1939. Nita, however, was ambitious and returned eventually upgrading to B and C licenses. She embarked on 5 more years of teaching in Pound Cove, Bridgeport, her hometown of Cape Friels, and finally back to Cat Arbor, where she ended her career with marriage in 1945. As with her mother-in-law some 30 years earlier, the new Mrs. Gibbons had to terminate her teaching career once married. And like Carrie Starks of Birchie Bay, Nita was expected to play for weddings, funerals, and church services, and continue this commitment throughout her life. Again, some earlier pioneers: Elsie Atwood of Northwest Arm, Ruth Porter of Elliston, and Gwen Hilliard of Carbonear were other admirable trailblazers from the early 40s. And Elsie Atwood, as I say here, went to teach in Lodge Bay, Labrador in 1939. In the 60s, her son Jim, a schoolmate of mine, became a social worker in Mary's Harbor, Labrador. He found his mother's school building in Lodge Bay still standing. And I believe that during that time in Labrador, Elsie contracted tuberculosis, from which she died, leaving 2 young sons to be raised by their aunts. Ruth Porter ended her teaching after marriage in Wesleyville and became a community leader there throughout her lifetime. Gwen Hilliard, later Matthews, married in Valleyfield, wrote for the Gander Beacon, and became a district commissioner, leading the guiding movement for many, many years there. So the big takeaway from all of these largely untold stories: teacher willingness to relocate and go out of bounds enrich their immediate society and their own lives. From the bibliography, I'll highlight a few items. Of course, the two books there that have been published by the NLTA, Tales Told by Teachers. I'll also mention the school car, of course, which is a shout out to Randy Noseworthy's book. And it's interesting because Frank Moores and his colleagues, the work that they did with isolated students along the rail line could almost be looked at as the forerunner of distance education, because in its later years, it embodied a form of correspondence school, which was aided by the postal system. I'll also highlight Aram Silk's interview with Miss Alice Lacey, which is available at MUN Digital Archives. And it's interesting that I do this a lot of the times, and maybe you notice it as well. Through obituaries in the Telegram or various funeral homes, that one often chances upon the life journey of many early teachers, such as Edith Williams from Pooch Cove, again, who settled in Norris Point for 80 years and contributed so much extra to the community, again, through the guiding movement and her love of photography. So a personal shout out here. This summer, I visited my grade 5 teacher in Gander. Ida Burry Winter, at 92, still lives independently. And again, like so many of these teenage teachers, she was the community organist in their various postings and married a teaching colleague. I believe she told me that when she was at Lawrencetown, she had to play the church organ 3 times a Sunday. And of course, preparing for concerts fell under the teacher's purview as well. The test had to be prepared with carbon paper, but luckily in the last couple of years that she taught, it was spent in a large K-11 school in Gander, where the family relocated. And her son and granddaughter also entered the teaching profession. So that was pretty special there back in August, I think it was. We met again. Anybody familiar with the New West Valley area will maybe have heard of Ida's Place, which is a well-known coffee shop, again, in the town of Greenspond. And it's connected to Ida, my grade 5 teacher. So thanks for your attention, and any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay,
sure.
especially from those who started in one-room schools with young teachers. Oh. Far away.
Probably more a comment than a question, but back in the 1970s, I was teaching here at MUN, and one of my students was telling me he went out teaching, and that was fine. Then they said, you had to teach Sunday school. It's fine. Then we got the lay reader in the church. That was fine. Then one time in the middle of the night, they woke him up. Mr. So-and-so died. You had to go shave him.
Oh my gosh, yes, yes.
Have you come across any other unusual things like that?
Yes, yes. Oh yes, certainly. I did hear about a young lady at 15 who went teaching in Woody Island, the resettled place where they have these weekends. And when she arrived on the dock or whatever and got out and was going up to her boarding house, I guess the guy who had brought her or was on with the school board said, "What's going to be your text tomorrow? When you keep church," essentially, right? So it was relentless, as you say. Mm-hmm.
Could I share a story?
Yes.
Elaine Spurl here. Back in 1964, I attended summer school. I was 16, and I stayed at Bishop Jones Hostel, which was a hostel for Anglican girls who went to summer school or Mon. And so forward to Monday past, and I was with a 50+ group that went to New West Valley to the group there in Badger's Key. They had invited our group from Hillview, Trinity Bay. And I said to the lady who was sitting with me, when I went to summer school in 64, there was a girl who roomed with me, and her name was Joyce Carter. I'd never seen her since, don't know if she's still alive or whatever. And lo and behold, she was there in the room, and we got to meet after all these years, since 1964. We went to summer, stayed in the same room at the hostel, and went to summer school together.
Incredible. Yes, incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Anybody else online?
Wonderful. So first off, Leona English would like to say, thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary Beth, for the interesting stories of the teachers. I'm curious to know if you came across any adult education teachers in the same time period. They were employees of the NL Education Association, formed in 1929. They were also teaching in outports, and I was wondering about if you saw any possible linkages.
Okay, so the Mennonite?
Sorry, we're looking at the adult people who were doing adult education, who were associated with the Newfoundland Adult Education Association, which was formed in 1929. If you saw any overlap on your teachers who were also teaching adults in their classroom or through connections to those types of teachers.
No, not really. I do understand that the people who taught in the probationer summer school in that 6-week period some of them were from some of the larger schools here in St. John's, that they became the teachers, I believe, for these people in the summertime. But not so much from adult education, no.
Okay, great, thank you. We also have a question from Joan Hodson, and she would like to say thank you so much for your efforts in compiling this interesting tribute to these remarkable women, these teachers. And she's wondering if you could comment about their ability to play the piano or the organ and how it sort of seemed to put them at the top of the list for selection, or how it impacted how they, were taken into communities.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it would be. That they, just like the men, mostly the male teachers were asked to do everything, as you say, funerals and be lay readers all the way through. Certainly, as you say, the women or anyone, male or female, who could play musical instruments for the church and also for the school concerts, that they were, as you say, top of the list. I know that Nita Roberts, that I referred to, she was my other elementary teacher who was still alive and in fantastic shape, more or less, and so on. She was, actually, she impressed them so much during her 6 weeks of training that she was offered a school here in St. John's. And instead, as I said, she went to Traytown. And I believe she is still playing in the United Church in Valleyfield to this day. She is still the organist with the United Church there.
Yep, so we have someone who has their hand up online. If you'd like, you can type your question in the chat, or if you would like to, it's okay if you want to turn your mic on and ask it. That seems to actually be working quite well too.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, no, thank you very much for the presentation. Even though I joined late, I did really enjoy it. I just want to say, about a year ago, I had the opportunity to do a eulogy for a a person who has spent a lifetime of teaching. Her name was Norma Goodwin from Brownsdale, and her first teaching job was outside of Clarenville. And when they offered her the job, which would have been a United Church school at the time, her salary was $70 per month. However, once I guess she signed on and filled out all the paperwork to be paid, they discovered that she wasn't 17 years old. So therefore, her salary was reduced to $50 per month until February when she turned 17. So, I tell that story because, um, now in the days of gender equity and so on, and I often wonder if the male at the time would have been treated in the same way. But it's interesting that, a verbal contract to pay her the $70 per month meant nothing when they discovered that she was not quite 17 and therefore reduced her salary, even though all of her expenses would have been the same. But she was working, really for, for about $50 a month or $600 a year. And, and that was in the 1950s, but it certainly didn't deter that person. She spent her lifetime in education and retired as a teacher in 1989, I think it was. But, there are so many stories, and it just seems to me that I guess it was the power of the church at the time to make a decision to impose a decision like that on a 16-year-old who was living, a long ways from home at that time because you had to go by train. So, it just adds to I guess, the body of literature and the stories that there are about teachers and their conditions in the early days of teaching and education in the province. So again, thank you very much for this opportunity to share that story, and thank you for for doing what you've done tonight.
Thank you. Yes, I was talking to another lady here in the audience whose sister experienced much the same thing, wasn't being paid less until she became 17. Yeah, so it was not an isolated incident for sure.
Has that got anybody's mind brewing here on other questions? I have two little my own stories. My father-in-law started teaching, he was 15. He didn't even earn enough to pay his board, so he had to go out and sell fish on the side. Couldn't afford to get married until he'd gone to at least 3 more summer schools. So he delayed marriage till he was in his late 20s. So it wasn't only females, the males also.
Yes.
They just were not getting enough money. Simple as that. I remember my first 2 years in school, the Cape Race School in kindergarten and grade 1. The teacher was 17 years old who'd done the Littledale College the summer. There was 30 students in the classroom. From kindergarten to grade 11, the oldest one there was a 19-year-old brother. So one can imagine control problems in that school. But she did a good job. She was lucky. She got back to the community, Ms. Meyer, from Cape Race. And she taught even St. John's, I think, for years after that, till she retired. But all of us, I'm sure, of the age would have some stories or anecdotes that will help understand what these young teachers went through, both male and females at that time. Anyone else interested in giving their past?
Okay.
So Joan has another follow-up question. She's wondering if you could speak to whether or not the teachers were assessed for their moral character and perhaps how they talked about this in their interviews and their reflections. How did that impact their, their careers and their decisions? Did that come up in your research?
Not really. In some cases, as I say, if the teacher had passed on, I was speaking to their son or daughter. it was, someone did ask, or the question came up somehow about, would you be turned down, you know, if you had done this training or not done this training, and what would it take with the great shortages and the desperation of finding teachers? You know, what would it take more or less to be turfed or have your school taken away from you? I don't think it happened very often, and you know, there was not much moral problems or conduct, I don't think. I'm not sure how much you could get into a small community in these days. Obviously, there were no drugs around probably and this kind of thing. So no, I did not hear of any people, you know, losing their teaching license, not the kind of problems we're even seeing right now. But if you remember on the national news a couple of weeks ago or a month ago or so, talking about the teacher shortages all across Canada. We're almost going through the same thing again, and the lack of substitute teachers and so on. And in Quebec in particular, such that I think thousands of classrooms that don't have teachers this year. And again, just like it was in the commission years, more or less, people are actually being put into classrooms in Quebec right now, ungraded, unlicensed, just adults. At least I think they're probably 18 or over. So that's, whereas we were dealing with, you know, teachers who were 16 and 17, yes. Okay, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wondered what message you'd have for new teachers today from what you've studied about these teachers.
Well, I think it's sort of alluded there in the little intro that Pat did. The fact that these teachers were capable and got such a rapport with people in the community because they were helping in other ways, and it was a two-way street outside of the classroom as well, that they earned trust. And I think once they gained the trust of these parents and students, that it was, you know, the communication was flowing. And I guess that's what you need to do in today's schools and today's classrooms as well. Yes. Okay.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth. That's a wonderful, you know, way of thinking with history and their experiences. I have one more question as a
Sure.
fellow researcher of education. One of the things I always find so interesting in looking at this research is how isolating often some of this work was, though they did embed in communities, though some teachers, of course, had so many challenges and where they were placed. And I was wondering if you could speak to in your research, if you found from those teachers how they solved those problems when they had issues with the school board, with the community, with parents. Did they talk about how they navigated those challenges when they had just sort of parachuted into these communities and were new? Did they speak much to how they took that on?
Again, as you say, you were pretty much left to your own devices. I remember the young shepherd woman who went to Harbor Lacou, as you say, and she just arrived on the wharf with 2 heavy suitcases and no one there to meet her, pretty much. So as you say, you had to improvise and deal with your own problems quite a bit.
Have very much support from sort of the school boards or their figures connected back, you know, either with church boards or St. John's. So they talk very much about if they were connected, or was it, you know, sometimes I've seen in the records just that deep sense of, nope, you are on your own. I've always wondered, especially as we moved into the 60s and the boards got, you know, there was a lot more oversight, there was a lot more placing of teachers. Did you find that changed, or?
Well, again, Reverend Green told me that once schools became integrated, for instance, there wasn't so much pressure on the one clergyman to be the be-all and end-all, caring for teacher placement and this kind of thing, that they rotated their board chairmanship and this kind of thing. But I remember Mabel Ivany, who went on to teach for over 40 years here in St. John's afterwards. telling me that she was on Change Islands, I think, at one point, and the clergy and the church were very, very controlling. You weren't, you know, you again were very much responsible for Sunday teaching as well. And the rules and regulations that were put on these teachers was just frightening by the church, essentially. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mary Beth. I just want to give us a moment here. Is there anybody else in the audience, either online? I can see a note from our technician there, though if you have a last comment, please feel welcome. Or is there anyone else here in person who would like to ask our speaker a question? Oh, wonderful.
My mother grew up in North Arm South, and she went to school during the 40s. And she came to town to go to school at a adult education because her teacher, recommended it. And her teacher was from Flat Rock. So where, Flat Rock was a Catholic community and North Arm South was a Catholic community, was in, these schools that the teacher training were they all, religious based teaching or training?
Okay, yes. You mean, were you always connected with the denomination?
Yeah.
Yes, oh, definitely. I remember there seemed to be almost a loop in the Badger's Key area of with the Anglican schools, teachers from Fogo Island, Trinity, Bonavista Bay, Badger's Key itself, and I suppose Greenspond. And it seemed as if they rotated around. A lot of people came from Fogo to teach in Badger's Key. People from Newtown would have been the other part of the loop. And they went up to Trinity, and it was like a loop that went around, for sure. Yes.
A question in your research.
Yes.
Did you have any of the teachers talk about the elocution lessons that they were required to do when they were in university?
You mean like how to speak the Queen's English? Yes. I'm not so sure if much was done I believe they may have done a bit of that in summer school, but in Memorial Faculty of Education, of course, when you were going in the 60s, and I assume the 50s as well, everybody, there were 4 subjects that you would take over and above your credit courses. It was phys ed, just like it had been in the 6-week training. Religion. I guess it might have been music as well, which would be useful, and speech. So as you say, there were speech classes to sort of standardize the English that you would speak when you went out into your various outport postings. Yes. So I'm pretty sure that they had a little bit of that as well, because that carried on. Up until the 60s, the mid 60s in the Faculty of Education.
Did any express their feelings about having to do the elocution classes?
No, I don't think so. I'm not sure. My husband is here in the audience tonight as well, and he went teaching at 17 in Botwood. He did have a year of university, but he remembers the speech classes as well, quite well, with Gracie Lehman in Memorial. Don't know if he wants to speak to that. What's that? Carry on.
Yes, that's very true. I remember as if it were yesterday, those speech classes. They had to take it. If you were a townie, you didn't.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was about the size of it, yes.
Cocker also taught the course.
Yes.
And there was a good reason behind that, teaching that speech
Sure.
course here at Memorial. Because even though I'm from Bonavista Bay, I couldn't understand the people from Bonavista. We both spoke English.
Yes,
So if you were going to send people around the island,
yes.
they had to be understood. And I know people criticize that now because they say, well, they got rid of our culture.
Yes.
No, it was an improvement for us. And I think every teacher that went through that course, either with Grace Lehman or Oswald Crocker, will say the same thing. It improved the teachers' capability, and it also improved the student that they taught when
Of
they went
course.
out into the outboard community.
Yes, yes, of course.
So I do disagree with it.
Yeah, there was nothing wrong with it, no. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Is there anybody else? I think we're sort of coming to the end of our evening here who has a question they would like to ask, either in person or see from our tech. I don't think I have anyone online. Okay, good. Last call. Would anybody else like to, while we have our expert here? Okay, well, in that case, I'm going to hand the mic over to our president to let him wrap up our evening. Thank you, Matt.
Mary Beth, thank you very, very much.
Okay, thank you.
To talk from the heart, because I know you yourself for many years as a teacher, and I'm sure some people in this room were teachers for many years. But we also realize that what we learned in school from these young men and young women affected our lives too. So it's good to know what they went through all those years ago. Sometimes you think they didn't have patience with you. Sometimes you think that, oh, they weren't really interested. But look at your own future and the future of a lot of Newfoundlanders who came out of these small schools, who were taught by these young teachers. They made great success themselves, so they had a tremendous impact. And the word bravery, I think, is right. Because can you imagine a 16-year-old getting off a wharf with 2 suitcases in a community they knew nobody, to go and teach kids who they probably never taught before? And they themselves had only been in school 3 months before that. So it was quite an achievement. Anyway, Mary Beth, I think you've given to us the innermost understanding, one would say, of how these people felt, because even after all these years,
Yes,
they themselves can relate and tell us exactly how they felt.
yes, yes, for sure.
Anyway,
Mhm.
thank you very much.
Okay,
Much appreciated.
glad to do it.
And we'd like, when this is all finished, I'm sure we'll love to read what's going to come out of it.
Okay.
Thank you very much.